Sarah Martinez had always believed in standing up for what was right, even when it wasn't popular. At 28, she worked as a marketing coordinator at Pinnacle Industries, a mid-sized tech company in downtown Seattle. Her colleagues knew her as someone who spoke her mind, but they also respected her fairness and genuine concern for others. The company's annual holiday party was scheduled for a Friday evening in December. The event was held in the spacious lobby of their office building, transformed for the occasion with twinkling lights, elegant decorations, and round tables draped in crisp white linens. Nearly 60 employees, their partners, and a few clients had gathered to celebrate another successful year. Sarah arrived wearing a navy blue dress that complemented her confident demeanor. She had been looking forward to this evening, especially since her boyfriend of 8 months, Marcus Thompson, would be joining her. Marcus worked in finance at a competing firm and had recently started attending company events with Sarah. He was charming and well-dressed, with an MBA from a prestigious university and a way of commanding attention in any room. As the evening progressed, laughter and conversation filled the air. The catering staff moved efficiently between tables, ensuring glasses stayed full and appetizers were constantly replenished. Among them was Miguel Santos, a janitor who had worked at Pinnacle Industries for over 15 years. Miguel was in his early 60s, with graying hair and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. Though his primary job was maintaining the building's cleanliness, he often helped with events like this, carrying trays and ensuring everything ran smoothly. Sarah had spoken with Miguel many times over the years. She knew he had immigrated from Mexico decades ago, worked multiple jobs to support his family, and had put 2 children through college. His English, while accented, was clear and understandable. Miguel took pride in his work and treated everyone with respect, from the CEO to the newest intern. The trouble began around 9 o'clock. Marcus had been drinking steadily throughout the evening, and Sarah noticed his volume increasing as the night progressed. She had mentioned this concern to him earlier, but he had laughed it off, claiming he was just having fun. Sarah tried to steer conversations toward lighter topics and keep Marcus engaged in pleasant discussions with her colleagues. Miguel was clearing empty plates from a nearby table when he accidentally bumped into Marcus while carrying a tray of glasses. One glass slipped and fell to the floor, shattering with a sharp crash that momentarily silenced the nearby conversations. Miguel immediately began apologizing profusely while kneeling to clean up the mess. "I am so sorry, sir," Miguel said, his accent more pronounced in his embarrassment. "Please, let me clean this up right away. I am very sorry for the accident." Marcus stared down at Miguel with a look of disgust that made Sarah's stomach turn. She could see the anger building in his face, and she quickly moved closer, hoping to defuse the situation before it escalated. "It's completely fine," Sarah said quickly, addressing both Miguel and Marcus. "Accidents happen. Don't worry about it, Miguel." But Marcus wasn't satisfied with letting it go. He had been complaining earlier about the service and seemed to view this as the perfect opportunity to voice his frustrations. His voice carried across the room as he began to berate Miguel, who was still kneeling on the floor, carefully picking up glass fragments. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Marcus said loudly, his words slightly slurred from alcohol. "How hard is it to carry a tray without dropping things? This is basic stuff, man. Maybe if you spoke English properly, you could understand simple instructions." The conversations around them began to die down as people turned to see what was happening. Sarah felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and anger. She placed a hand on Marcus's arm, trying to calm him down. "Marcus, please," she said quietly. "It was just an accident. Let's not make a big deal out of this." Miguel looked up from the floor, his face flushed with humiliation. He continued cleaning while trying to make himself as small as possible, clearly hoping the situation would end quickly. Other staff members had noticed the commotion and were beginning to approach to help, but Marcus's voice only grew louder. "No, Sarah, this is ridiculous," Marcus continued, pulling his arm away from her grasp. "I mean, look at this guy. He can barely speak the language, and now he's destroying property. How is someone like this even allowed to work here? This is a professional company, not a charity case." The words hung in the air like poison. Sarah felt her heart racing as she looked around the room. Several of her colleagues had stopped their conversations entirely and were watching the scene unfold. She could see the hurt in Miguel's eyes as he continued cleaning, his movements becoming more hurried and shaky. "Marcus, stop," Sarah said more firmly, her voice carrying a warning tone. "You're being completely inappropriate." But Marcus seemed energized by the attention he was receiving. He had always enjoyed being the center of attention, and the alcohol had stripped away his usual social filters. He gestured broadly toward Miguel, who was now standing with a small trash bin full of glass pieces. "Inappropriate? What's inappropriate is having someone who clearly doesn't belong here serving our company's guests. I mean, seriously, how did this guy even get hired? Did anyone check his immigration status? Because I'm pretty sure real Americans could use these jobs." The room had grown noticeably quieter. Sarah could feel the weight of dozens of pairs of eyes watching the scene unfold. She looked at Miguel, who seemed to shrink further into himself with each cruel word. His hands were trembling slightly as he held the trash bin, and she could see him struggling to maintain his composure. Sarah's supervisor, Jennifer Walsh, began making her way over from across the room, her expression serious and concerned. The CEO, David Chen, had also noticed the disturbance and was heading in their direction. Sarah realized that this situation was spiraling out of control and that Marcus was not only humiliating Miguel but also embarrassing her and potentially damaging her professional reputation. "That's enough," Sarah said, her voice firm and clear. "Marcus, you need to stop talking right now." Marcus turned to face her, surprise flickering across his features. He wasn't used to Sarah confronting him so directly, especially not in public. His expression shifted from surprise to annoyance as he realized she wasn't going to support his behavior. "Are you seriously taking his side over mine?" Marcus asked, his voice rising with indignation. "I'm your boyfriend, Sarah. I would think you'd have my back here instead of defending some random janitor who can't do his job properly." Miguel stood frozen nearby, still holding the trash bin, clearly uncertain whether he should leave or stay. Sarah could see that he was fighting back tears, and her heart broke for this kind man who had been working quietly and diligently all evening, only to be subjected to this cruel and unprovoked attack. "His name is Miguel," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And he's not some random janitor. He's a hard-working man who has been with this company for 15 years. He's helped organize dozens of these events, always with a smile and never a complaint. He speaks 3 languages, has raised 2 children who are now college graduates, and treats everyone here with respect and kindness." Marcus stared at her, clearly taken aback by her passionate defense. Around them, the room had grown even quieter, with nearly everyone within earshot now paying attention to the confrontation. Sarah could feel the weight of their attention, but she didn't care anymore. She was beyond worrying about making a scene. "And, as for having your back," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger, "I will always support you when you're right, but I will never stand by and watch you humiliate an innocent person who was just doing his job. What you're saying is cruel, racist, and completely unacceptable." The word racist seemed to hit Marcus like a slap. His face flushed red, and Sarah could see anger flashing in his eyes. He had never liked being challenged, and being called out for racism in front of a room full of people was clearly more than his ego could handle. "Racist," he repeated, his voice tight with anger. "How dare you call me racist? I'm not racist just because I expect basic competency from service staff. And I don't appreciate being lectured by my girlfriend in front of all these people about political correctness." Sarah felt something shift inside her as she listened to his words. This wasn't just about the incident with Miguel anymore. This was about seeing a side of Marcus that she had never fully recognized before, a side that was ugly, entitled, and fundamentally at odds with her own values. "This isn't about political correctness," Sarah replied, her voice calm but firm. "This is about basic human decency and respect. Something you're clearly lacking right now." The tension in the room was palpable. Sarah could see Jennifer and David approaching more quickly now, recognizing that intervention was needed. Miguel remained frozen in place, clearly uncomfortable but unable to extract himself from the situation that had formed around him. Marcus looked around the room, seeming to suddenly realize how many people were watching and listening to their argument. His face grew even redder as he recognized several of Sarah's colleagues and superiors among the audience. The alcohol in his system wasn't helping him process the situation rationally, and Sarah could see him becoming more agitated by the second. "Fine," Marcus said, his voice dripping with sarcasm and anger. "If you want to choose some random immigrant over your own boyfriend, that says everything I need to know about your priorities. But don't expect me to just stand here and be disrespected by you in front of all these people." Sarah felt a surge of anger at his continued disrespect toward Miguel, whom he was still refusing to acknowledge as a person worthy of basic consideration. She also realized that Marcus was more concerned about his own embarrassment than about the pain he had caused Miguel or the damage he had done to her professional relationships. "The only person being disrespected here is Miguel," Sarah said firmly. "And the only person causing embarrassment is you." As these words left her mouth, Sarah noticed that Miguel had quietly begun to move away from the confrontation, clearly hoping to escape the uncomfortable situation. But Marcus, in his anger and intoxication, seemed determined to have the last word, and his next action would push the situation far beyond anything Sarah could have anticipated. As Miguel attempted to quietly remove himself from the increasingly tense situation, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Perhaps it was the alcohol clouding his judgment, or maybe it was his wounded pride at being challenged so publicly by Sarah, but instead of letting the janitor leave with what remained of his dignity, Marcus decided to escalate the confrontation. "Oh, now you're just going to walk away?" Marcus called out loudly, causing Miguel to freeze mid-step. "That's typical. Make a mess, get called out for it, and then just disappear without taking responsibility." Sarah watched in horror as Marcus took several steps toward Miguel, his movements slightly unsteady but his intention clear. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as the situation teetered on the edge of becoming something much worse than a verbal argument. "Marcus, don't," Sarah warned, her voice sharp with alarm. She could see where this was heading, and every instinct told her to intervene before it was too late. Miguel turned around slowly, his expression a mixture of confusion, fear, and resignation. At 62 years old and standing barely 5 feet 6 inches tall, he presented no threat to anyone. His uniform was still neat despite the evening's work, and he clutched the small trash bin containing the broken glass as if it were a shield. "Sir, I do not want any trouble," Miguel said quietly, his accent thick with emotion. "I clean up the glass, I say I am sorry. I just want to finish my work and go home to my family." But Marcus was beyond reason now. The combination of alcohol, embarrassment, and what he perceived as disrespect from both Sarah and the watching crowd had pushed him past his breaking point. In his mind, he had been publicly humiliated, and someone needed to pay for it. "Your family?" Marcus sneered, moving closer to Miguel. "Let me guess, probably half of them aren't even supposed to be in this country, right? Living off welfare while real taxpayers like me foot the bill?" A collective gasp went up from the nearby witnesses. Sarah felt her face burn with shame and anger at Marcus's words. She had never seen this side of him before, and it was worse than anything she could have imagined. "That's enough," Sarah shouted, stepping between Marcus and Miguel. "I'm not going to stand here and listen to you spout racist garbage at a man who has done nothing wrong." David Chen, the CEO, had finally reached them, along with Jennifer Walsh and several other senior employees. David's face was grave as he assessed the situation, clearly recognizing the serious nature of what was unfolding at his company's holiday party. "Gentlemen, ladies," David said in a calm but authoritative voice, "I think we need to take a step back here." "Miguel, why don't you know?" Marcus interrupted, his voice loud and slurred. "I'm not done talking to him. This guy needs to learn some respect." Marcus reached out toward Miguel, ostensibly to grab his arm, but Miguel instinctively stepped backward, bumping into a nearby table. The movement caused Marcus to stumble slightly, and, in his intoxicated state, he interpreted Miguel's defensive reaction as aggression. "Are you serious right now?" Marcus said, his voice rising to an earshout. "You're going to get physical with me?" "I knew it."
People like you can't solve anything without violence.
The accusation was so backwards, so divorced from reality, that several people in the crowd began murmuring protests. Miguel had done nothing but try to avoid confrontation, while Marcus was clearly the aggressor in the situation.
Sarah felt something snap inside her.
She had tried to de-escalate the situation, tried to protect Miguel from further abuse, tried to give Marcus opportunities to back down gracefully. But now he was actively threatening a man old enough to be his father, a man who was simply trying to do his job and get home to his family. "Stop it right now," Sarah said, her voice carrying an authority that surprised even her.
"Miguel has done absolutely nothing wrong, and I will not stand here and watch you bully him."
Marcus whirled around to face her, his eyes blazing with anger and alcohol-fueled rage. For a moment, Sarah wondered if she had pushed him too far, if his anger might now be directed at her. But she stood her ground, meeting his gaze steadily. "I can't believe you," Marcus said, his voice shaking with fury.
"You're actually choosing this nobody over me.
Your own boyfriend.
Do you have any idea how this makes me look?"
"How this makes you look?" Sarah repeated, her voice incredulous. "Marcus, you've spent the last 10 minutes publicly humiliating an innocent man, making racist comments, and threatening someone who poses no threat to anyone.
How you look is the least of your concerns right now."
The watching crowd had grown larger as word of the confrontation spread throughout the party. Sarah could see faces she recognized from various departments, all watching with expressions ranging from shock to disgust to uncomfortable fascination. She realized that whatever happened next would be witnessed by a significant portion of her colleagues and would likely be discussed in office corridors for months to come.
Miguel still stood nearby, clearly wanting to leave but uncertain whether it was safe to move.
His eyes darted between Marcus and the exits, and Sarah could see him calculating whether he could slip away without further escalating the situation.
"You know what?"
Marcus said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge.
"Maybe you need to see what kind of man you're really defending."
Before anyone could react, Marcus suddenly shoved Miguel hard in the chest. The older man, caught completely off guard, stumbled backward and fell against the table behind him, sending glasses and plates crashing to the floor. The sound of breaking dishes echoed through the now silent room. The attack was so sudden, so unprovoked, and so cruel that for a moment everyone stood frozen in shock.
Miguel lay partially draped over the table, stunned and clearly hurt.
His uniform shirt was torn, and Sarah could see the beginning of what would certainly become a large bruise on his chest. That was the moment Sarah Martinez stopped thinking and started acting on pure instinct. "How dare you!" she screamed, her voice carrying across the entire room. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and delivered a sharp, hard slap across Marcus's face that echoed like a gunshot in the silent space. The slap was so unexpected and so forceful that Marcus staggered backward, his hand immediately going to his reddening cheek. The shock of being struck seemed to temporarily cut through his alcoholic haze, and, for the first time that evening, he appeared to fully grasp what was happening around him. "You just hit me," he said, his voice filled with disbelief.
"You actually hit me."
"And I'll do it again if you touch him," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system.
"What is wrong with you? He's an elderly man who was just doing his job.
How could you possibly think it's okay to physically assault him?" Sarah immediately turned to Miguel, who was slowly pulling himself upright with the help of a nearby chair. She gently took his arm to steady him, her expression filled with concern and compassion.
"Are you hurt, Miguel?"
"Do you need medical attention?" she asked softly, her voice a complete contrast to the fury she had just displayed toward Marcus. Miguel touched his chest gingerly and winced but shook his head.
"I think I am okay, Miss Sarah."
"Just surprised."
"I have never, no one has ever."
His voice trailed off as he struggled to process what had just happened to him. David Chen stepped forward, his expression grim and professional. "Miguel, I want you to know that this behavior is completely unacceptable and does not represent the values of this company in any way. Please, let's get you checked by our security team and make sure you're not seriously injured." Jennifer Walsh had already pulled out her phone and was speaking quietly to someone, presumably security or possibly even the police. The legal implications of what had just occurred were not lost on the company's management team. Marcus stood in the center of the circle that had formed around them, his hand still pressed to his cheek, looking around at the faces of the 50-plus witnesses who had just watched him assault an elderly janitor at a company Christmas party. The reality of his situation was finally beginning to penetrate his alcohol-fogged brain. "This is ridiculous," he said, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier.
"Everyone is acting like I committed some kind of crime." The guy fell into a table. "It was barely a push." "Barely a push?" Sarah repeated, her voice rising again. "You shoved a 62-year-old man hard enough to knock him down and send dishes flying. And you did it because he accidentally dropped a glass while cleaning up. Do you understand how insane that is?" Marcus looked around the room, perhaps hoping to find some sympathy or support among the witnesses, but every face that met his gaze reflected some combination of disgust, shock, or disapproval. Even people who didn't know Miguel personally were clearly appalled by what they had witnessed. "Sarah, you need to understand," Marcus said, his tone becoming pleading as the severity of his situation became clear. "I've been drinking, I'm not thinking clearly. This whole thing got blown out of proportion. I never meant for anyone to get hurt." "But someone did get hurt," Sarah replied firmly. "Miguel got hurt because you decided that your embarrassment was more important than his safety and dignity. And, you know what? I got hurt too, watching the man I thought I cared about reveal himself to be someone I don't even recognize." The weight of her words seemed to hit Marcus like a physical blow. He looked at her with growing desperation, finally realizing that this wasn't just about the incident with Miguel anymore. His relationship with Sarah was also hanging in the balance. "Come on, Sarah," he said, reaching out toward her. "You can't be serious about ending things over this. We've been together for 8 months. You know I'm not really like this. It's just the alcohol talking." Sarah stepped back, avoiding his outstretched hand. Around them, the crowd continued to watch, though some people had begun trying to help Miguel and clean up the new mess that Marcus's assault had created. "The alcohol didn't create these thoughts, Marcus," Sarah said quietly but clearly. "It just revealed them. I've seen who you really are tonight, and it's not someone I can respect or love." The finality in her voice seemed to break through Marcus's remaining denial. He looked around the room one more time, taking in the hostile faces, the whispered conversations, the way people were actively avoiding eye contact with him. "This isn't over," he said, though it sounded more like a desperate hope than a threat. But Sarah was done listening to him. She turned her attention back to Miguel, who was now sitting in a chair that someone had brought over. His color was better, and he seemed to be recovering from the shock of the attack, though she could see he was still shaken. "Miguel, I am so sorry this happened to you," she said, kneeling beside his chair. "You didn't deserve any of this." Miguel looked at her with eyes that were bright with unshed tears, though whether from pain, gratitude, or something else entirely, Sarah couldn't tell. "Thank you, Miss Sarah," he said quietly. "Thank you for standing up for me. In all my years working here, no one has ever." He paused, seemingly unable to find the right words. "You are a good person. A very good person." As security personnel finally arrived and began to take statements from witnesses, Sarah realized that her life had just changed dramatically. In the span of 20 minutes, she had lost a boyfriend, gained the respect of her colleagues, and learned something important about herself and her own capacity for courage. The aftermath of the confrontation unfolded with the methodical precision of a corporate crisis response. Security personnel arrived within minutes, followed shortly by paramedics who insisted on examining Miguel despite his protests that he was fine. The holiday party, which had been filled with laughter and celebration just an hour earlier, now resembled a crime scene as witnesses were separated and statements were taken. Sarah found herself sitting in a quiet conference room with Detective Maria Rodriguez, a patient woman in her 40s who specialized in workplace incidents. The detective's questions were thorough but sympathetic, and Sarah recounted the entire evening's events with careful attention to detail. "Miss Martinez," Detective Rodriguez said, reviewing her notes, "you mentioned that you had never seen this side of Mr. Thompson before. Had there been any previous incidents or warning signs that you might have overlooked?" Sarah considered the question carefully.
In the heat of the moment, her actions had been purely instinctive, but, now, in the quiet of the conference room, she found herself reflecting on her 8-month relationship with Marcus in a new light. "I thought I knew him," she said slowly. "He could be demanding sometimes, especially with service staff at restaurants. I always attributed it to him having high standards, but, looking back..." She paused, remembering instances she had previously dismissed. There were times when he made comments about people's accents or complained about workers he felt weren't competent enough. "I thought it was just him being particular, but tonight showed me it was something much uglier." Meanwhile, in another room, Marcus was having a very different conversation with a second detective. His lawyer, hastily summoned by phone, sat beside him as Marcus attempted to minimize the severity of his actions. The alcohol had mostly worn off by now, leaving him with a clearer view of just how badly he had damaged his life in the span of 20 minutes. "I want to emphasize that this was completely out of character for my client," his lawyer was saying. "Mr. Thompson is a respected professional with no history of violence. The alcohol consumption at the company event clearly impaired his judgment." Detective Williams, a veteran officer who had seen countless cases of workplace violence, wasn't impressed by the defense. "Mr. Thompson, regardless of your alcohol consumption, you physically assaulted an elderly man who posed no threat to you. We have over 50 witnesses who saw you push Mr. Santos hard enough to knock him down and injure him." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "It wasn't that hard of a push. I was just trying to get his attention. I never intended for him to fall." "Your intention doesn't change the fact that you committed assault," Detective Williams replied firmly. "And the racial comments you made before the physical altercation suggest this wasn't simply a case of poor judgment due to intoxication." In the main office area, Miguel was sitting with David Chen and Jennifer Walsh, still somewhat stunned by the evening's events. The paramedics had confirmed that while he had some bruising and soreness, there were no serious injuries. However, the emotional impact of the attack was clearly significant. "Miguel, I want you to know that the company will be taking full responsibility for what happened here tonight," David said earnestly. "This should never have occurred at our event, and we failed in our duty to provide a safe environment for all our employees and staff." Miguel nodded slowly, still processing everything. "Mr. Chen, I have worked many parties like this. I have cleaned up many spills, broken many glasses myself. Never has anyone treated me like this. Never has anyone been so angry about an accident." Jennifer leaned forward, her expression sympathetic. "Miguel, you've been with this company for 15 years. You're valued here, and what that man did to you was wrong on every level. We want to make sure you have whatever support you need, including legal representation if you choose to pursue charges." The mention of legal action seemed to surprise Miguel. "I do not know about such things. I just want to go home to my wife, tell her I am okay. She worries when I work late events." "Of course," David said. "We've already arranged for a car to take you home tonight. And, please, take tomorrow off with full pay. We'll handle any additional cleanup from tonight." As Miguel gathered his things to leave, he stopped by the conference room where Sarah was finishing her statement with Detective Rodriguez. Through the glass window, their eyes met, and Miguel gestured for her to come out. "Miss Sarah," he said when she emerged from the room, "I want to thank you again. What you did tonight, standing up for me like that, it means more than you know." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Miguel, you don't need to thank me. What happened to you is wrong, and I couldn't just stand by and watch it happen." Miguel reached into his wallet and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It showed a family gathering with Miguel, his wife, and their 2 adult children, along with several grandchildren. "This is my family," he said proudly. "My daughter, she is a teacher now. My son, he is an engineer. They both went to college because I worked jobs like this one. When people like that man say things about people like me, they do not see this. They do not see that we are just trying to build good lives for our families." Sarah looked at the photograph, seeing the joy and pride in the faces of Miguel's children and grandchildren. The contrast between this loving family portrait and Marcus's cruel stereotypes was stark and heartbreaking. Your children should be proud of you, Sarah said softly.
You're a good man, Miguel. A much better man than Marcus could ever hope to be.
As Miguel left for the evening, Sarah returned to the conference room to find that Detective Rodriguez had finished taking statements from most of the key witnesses.
The detective's expression was serious as she addressed Sarah.
Miss Martinez, I want you to know that Mr. Thompson will be facing charges for assault. The evidence is overwhelming, and we have multiple witnesses who confirm your account of events.
However, I do need to ask you about your reaction to the assault.
Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness.
You mean when I slapped him?
Yes. While your anger was completely understandable given the circumstances, technically speaking, that was also an assault. However, given the provocation and the fact that you were defending someone who had just been attacked, it's highly unlikely that Mr. Thompson would pursue charges, and even less likely that a prosecutor would take such a case. Relief washed over Sarah, though she realized she hadn't really considered the legal implications of her own actions until now. I don't regret it, she said firmly.
I would do the same thing again.
Detective Rodriguez smiled slightly.
I believe you would.
Your colleagues have had nothing but positive things to say about your character and your reputation in this company. Mr. Thompson, on the other hand, has made quite a negative impression on everyone we've spoken with tonight. When the detective left, Sarah found herself alone in the conference room, finally, having a moment to process what had happened. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation and its immediate aftermath was beginning to fade, leaving her emotionally drained and somewhat shaky. Jennifer Walsh knocked on the doorframe and entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee.
I thought you might need this, she said, offering 1 cup to Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah said gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm cup.
Jennifer, I'm sorry about all of this.
I know having something like this happen at a company event creates a lot of problems. Jennifer sat down across from her, shaking her head.
Sarah, you have absolutely nothing to apologize for.
What you did tonight was remarkable. You stood up for someone who couldn't defend himself against a man who was bigger, younger, and in a position of social privilege. That takes real courage. I just couldn't stand by and watch it happen, Sarah said, echoing what she had told Miguel earlier.
The things he was saying, the way he was treating Miguel, it was like he saw him as less than human.
Unfortunately, that kind of attitude is more common than we'd like to believe, Jennifer replied sadly. But what's rare is finding someone who's willing to take a stand against it, especially when it means challenging someone close to them. You sacrificed your relationship to defend a principle, and that says everything about who you are as a person. As they sat in comfortable silence, Sarah found herself thinking about the evening's events from a broader perspective. The incident with Marcus hadn't just revealed his true character, it had also shown her something about herself that she hadn't fully recognized before. She had always believed in fairness and justice, but, until tonight, those beliefs had never been truly tested.
Jennifer, Sarah said slowly, do you think this will affect my position here at the company?
I mean, I did create quite a scene at the holiday party. Jennifer laughed, the first genuine moment of lightness in the past several hours.
Sarah, if anything, this will enhance your reputation here. Do you know how many of your colleagues have come up to me tonight to say how impressed they were with your integrity? David is already talking about the company giving you some kind of recognition for your actions.
The idea of being recognized for what had felt like such a natural response seemed strange to Sarah.
I wasn't trying to be heroic.
I was just trying to do what was right.
That's exactly what makes it heroic, Jennifer replied. Real courage isn't about seeking glory or recognition.
It's about doing the right thing even when it's difficult or costly. As the evening wound down and the last of the statements were taken, Sarah finally prepared to leave the office building where so much had changed in such a short time. The main lobby, which had been decorated so beautifully for the party, now looked somewhat disheveled, with overturned chairs and broken glass marking the spots where the confrontation had taken place. David Chen found her as she was gathering her coat and purse. Sarah, before you go, I want you to know that what happened here tonight will not be forgotten. Not the assault on Miguel, and not your response to it. We're going to be making some changes to our event security protocols, and we'll also be implementing additional diversity and inclusion training for all staff.
That sounds like a good idea, Sarah said. Miguel shouldn't have to worry about being treated that way at his workplace. He won't, David said firmly. And, Sarah, if you ever need anything from this company, if you ever need a reference or support for any reason, you have it. What you did tonight represents the best of what we hope to be as an organization. As Sarah walked out into the cool Seattle night, she realized that while she had lost a boyfriend that evening, she had gained something much more valuable, a clearer understanding of her own values and the courage to stand up for them. The confrontation with Marcus had been painful and embarrassing, but it had also been necessary. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus, "We need to talk. What happened tonight doesn't have to end things between us." Sarah looked at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some things, she realized, couldn't be fixed with conversation. Some revelations changed everything, and there was no going back to the way things were before. The real test, she knew, would come in the days and weeks ahead, as the legal proceedings unfolded and the story of the holiday party confrontation spread beyond the walls of Pinnacle Industries. The weeks following the holiday party incident brought changes that Sarah could never have anticipated. What had started as a spontaneous defense of an innocent man had rippled outward, affecting not just her own life but the entire culture of Pinnacle Industries and even reaching into the broader Seattle community. The legal proceedings moved forward swiftly. Marcus was formally charged with assault and battery, and despite his lawyer's attempts to negotiate a plea deal that would avoid jail time, the prosecutor was determined to make an example of the case. The fact that the assault had been motivated by racial animus and had been witnessed by dozens of people made it a high-profile case that attracted media attention. Sarah found herself thrust into an uncomfortable spotlight when local news outlets picked up the story. Tech worker assaults elderly janitor at company party read one headline, while another declared woman slaps boyfriend after he attacks senior citizen. The attention was unwanted but unavoidable, and Sarah had to navigate interview requests and social media mentions while trying to maintain some sense of normalcy in her daily life. Miguel, meanwhile, had become something of a folk hero in the immigrant community. Word of what had happened spread through networks of workers throughout the city, and many people saw his dignified response to the attack as representative of the quiet strength that characterized so many hard-working immigrants. A local Hispanic advocacy group reached out to offer him legal support and to ask if he would be willing to speak at community events about workplace discrimination. "I never wanted to be famous for something like this," Miguel told Sarah during one of their conversations in the weeks after the incident. They had developed an unexpected friendship, bonded by the shared experience of that traumatic evening. "But, my wife, she says maybe God put me in this situation so that other people will be helped." Sarah had been visiting Miguel and his wife Carmen regularly, bringing them groceries and helping Miguel navigate the legal system. Their small but immaculate apartment was filled with photographs of their children and grandchildren, and Sarah had come to understand even more deeply what Marcus's attack had really represented, an assault not just on Miguel personally, but on everything he had worked so hard to build. "Carmen is right," Sarah told him. "Your grace and dignity through all of this has been inspiring to a lot of people. Including me." The trial, when it finally took place, was swift and decisive. Marcus's defense team had hoped that his clean record and professional status would earn him sympathy from the jury, but the testimony from the 50-plus witnesses painted a clear picture of unprovoked violence and racial hatred. Sarah's testimony was particularly powerful, as she described not just the events of that evening but also the pattern of behavior she had observed in Marcus over the months of their relationship. "I realized that night that I had been making excuses for behavior that was inexcusable," she told the packed courtroom. "I had been telling myself that his comments about immigrants and service workers were just him being particular or having high standards. But what I saw that evening was the real Marcus Thompson, someone who believed that his status gave him the right to humiliate and physically assault a man who was just trying to do his job." Marcus was ultimately sentenced to 6 months in jail, 2 years of probation, community service, and mandatory anger management and diversity training. He also faced a civil lawsuit from Miguel, which his insurance company settled out of court for an undisclosed amount.
But, perhaps more significantly, Marcus lost his job when his employer learned about the conviction. The finance firm where he worked had a strict policy about criminal convictions, and his assault charge made him unemployable in most professional settings. The promising career he had been building crumbled in the aftermath of those 20 minutes at the holiday party.
Sarah felt no satisfaction in Marcus's downfall.
If anything, she felt a sense of sadness for the waste of it all. He could have been a better person, she told Jennifer during one of their lunch meetings. He had every advantage in life, every opportunity to grow and learn.
But he chose hatred and entitlement instead.
The incident had also catalyzed significant changes at Pinnacle Industries. David Chen had been true to his word about implementing new policies and training programs. The company brought in diversity consultants to conduct workshops on unconscious bias and cultural sensitivity. They also established a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior and created anonymous reporting systems for employees to report incidents of harassment or discrimination. More personally, the company had offered Miguel a promotion to a supervisory role in the facilities department, with a significant increase in pay and benefits. After 30 years of working multiple jobs to support his family, Miguel finally had the financial security he had always dreamed of. "Miss Sarah," Miguel told her with tears in his eyes when he shared the news, "I never thought something so terrible could lead to something so good. My grandchildren, they will have better opportunities because of what happened that night."
The promotion ceremony was held 3 months after the holiday party incident, and Sarah was invited as the guest of honor.
As she watched Miguel receive recognition from the company leadership, she thought about how dramatically both of their lives had changed since that December evening.
The media attention had also brought unexpected opportunities for Sarah herself.
Several civil rights organizations had reached out to ask her to speak at their events, and she had received job offers from companies that had been impressed by her integrity and courage. While she had chosen to stay at Pinnacle Industries for now, she knew that her actions that night had opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed. The story had also gone viral on social media, with the hashtag #StandUpForOthers trending for several days. People shared their own stories of witnessing discrimination and either speaking up or regretting their silence. Sarah received hundreds of messages from strangers telling her that her actions had inspired them to be more courageous in their own lives. One message that particularly moved her came from a young teacher in Texas. "I saw your story and it gave me the courage to speak up when I heard other teachers making racist comments about our immigrant students.
Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like."
Another came from a college student in Florida. "Your story inspired me to finally report the harassment I've been experiencing from a classmate. I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad, but seeing how you stood up for someone who couldn't defend himself made me realize that staying silent wasn't protecting anyone." As spring arrived in Seattle, Sarah found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed since that December evening. She had ended a relationship that she now realized had been built on a foundation of compromise and willful blindness. She had gained a deeper understanding of her own values and her capacity for moral courage. And she had forged new friendships and connections with people who shared her commitment to justice and equality. Miguel had become like an adopted grandfather to her, and his family had welcomed her into their circle with warmth and gratitude. She regularly joined them for Sunday dinners, where the conversation flowed between English and Spanish and the table was always filled with laughter and love. "You know," Carmen told her during one of these gatherings, "Miguel always believed that good people would outnumber the bad ones. But, that night, he was beginning to lose faith."
"You gave him that faith back?"
Sarah looked around the table at Miguel and Carmen's children and grandchildren, all of whom had achieved success through hard work and determination, despite facing discrimination and prejudice along the way. She thought about how close Marcus had come to crushing Miguel's spirit with his cruelty, and how important it was for good people to speak up when they witnessed injustice. The relationship with Marcus felt like something that had happened to a different person. Sarah could barely remember what she had seen in him, what had attracted her to someone who harbored such ugly prejudices. She realized now that she had been drawn to his confidence and social status without really examining the character beneath the surface. "I learned something important that night," she told her therapist during one of their sessions. "I learned that being comfortable isn't the same as being happy, and that avoiding conflict isn't the same as finding peace.
Sometimes standing up for what's right means being willing to lose something you thought you valued.
As the anniversary of the incident approached, Pinnacle Industries announced that they would be establishing an annual award for employees who demonstrated exceptional integrity and courage in standing up for others. The inaugural recipient would be Sarah Martinez, and the award would be named the Miguel Santos Award for Workplace Courage. Miguel was present at the ceremony, along with his entire family, beaming with pride as Sarah received recognition for actions that had changed all of their lives. In her acceptance speech, Sarah spoke about the importance of recognizing the humanity in everyone, regardless of their position or status. That night, I saw someone I cared about treating another human being as if he were invisible, as if his feelings and dignity didn't matter, she said to the assembled crowd. I realized that staying silent would have made me complicit in that dehumanization. We all have moments in our lives when we're called upon to choose between what's comfortable and what's right. I hope that when those moments come, we all find the courage to choose correctly. After the ceremony, as people mingled and shared stories about their own experiences with workplace discrimination and courage, Sarah found herself in conversation with a young intern who had started at the company just a few weeks earlier. I heard about what happened at the holiday party, the intern said shyly. It must have been really scary to stand up to your boyfriend like that in front of all those people. Sarah considered the question thoughtfully. You know, it was scary, she admitted. But what was scarier was the thought of Miguel going home that night feeling humiliated and alone, thinking that nobody cared enough to defend him. Sometimes being scared is less important than being decent. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Miguel approached Sarah with a small wrapped package. My wife and I wanted to give you something, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Inside the package was a framed photograph, the same family portrait Miguel had shown her that night in December, but now expanded to include Sarah herself, taken during one of their Sunday dinners. At the bottom, Carmen had written in careful script, "Family isn't just about blood. It's about who stands with you when it matters most." Looking at the photograph, Sarah realized that while the events of that December evening had cost her a relationship, they had given her something far more valuable, the knowledge that when tested, she had chosen courage over comfort, justice over convenience, and love over fear. The story of the holiday party confrontation had become part of the lore of Pinnacle Industries, told to new employees as an example of the company's values in action. But, for Sarah, Miguel, and the dozens of people whose lives had been touched by that evening's events, it was more than just a story. It was a reminder that ordinary people, faced with extraordinary moments, have the power to choose who they want to be. And, sometimes, those choices change everything.